today. Our roundtable today is about U.S. Armenia trade and investment. It's one of those fortunate issues on which there's very broad consensus. All the key stakeholders would like to see U.S. Armenia economic relations grow. Certainly our government, the U.S. government, would like to see that. Ambassador Heffern has spoken very eloquently on the subject, as have others, including the President, as a candidate, spoke very passionately about the need to see U.S. Armenia trade and investment grow, and others throughout the system have articulated that as well, so we welcome that. We've seen the Armenian government speak about the need for, and their desire for, a stronger commercial relationship. You've seen the business community, companies as diverse as Microsoft, NASDAQ, and Grant Thornton, FedEx, have said that they'd like to see the types of agreements. I think a TIFA and a tax treaty are two of the issues that we have put on the table, and that they also supported. But we've seen some voices from the business community also say that this is something they'd like to see. And then the Armenian American community, I think through the ANC, through other voices, has said that this is something that we prioritize. So there's broad consensus, I think, on the goal, which is to see the numbers grow. And I think prior to today, we posted online some charts that showed the general direction of trade is positive, the general direction of investment is positive, but we think there's a lot more room for growth. This is against the background of reductions in aid. Aid has, in the last 20 years, generally declined. I think the debate this year will be over something between $30 and $40 million in economic aid, and that's certainly not a very sound basis for a strong relationship. That's just not enough to really make the type of meaningful change that increased trade and investment could. There are material advantages to U.S. jobs, job creators, U.S. industry, same in Armenia. It also brings the countries closer together. I think there's I think that our shared values can kind of be expressed more robustly if we're have a better trade relationship and there's more investment. So in a nutshell, it's something that pretty much all sides agree upon, right? It's a goal that we'd all like to see, but the debate is how do we get there? And that's good. The good news is that there's a discussion on it. We're very much appreciative of the Department of State being represented here today, and you're a very, very important part of that discussion. The Armenian community is a part of that discussion. The Armenian government's a part of that discussion. Let's have the discussion and try to explore and navigate an intelligent path forward. That's our goal today. And in moving toward that goal, we're very fortunate to be joined by our two speakers. You'll speak second, but I'll introduce you first. We have with us Justin Friedman, who is the Director of Caucasus Affairs and Regional Conflicts at the State Department. He took that job in July 2011. I'm sure it feels like a little bit more than just that short time.
The gray hairs are showing.
and he's responsible for managing the full spectrum of U.S. relations with Armenia, Azerbaijan, and Georgia. He is a good friend of the Armenian American community, a very capable, respected diplomat, and diplomats do hold a very special place in the community's heart. We, as long as there have been Armenians in the U.S., we've been very close to the diplomats who deal with issues that matter to us, and going back to Ambassador Nora, fast forward to Ambassador Evans, who also has a special quadrant of the Armenian soul, and just diplomats overall who just work day in and day out, often at great risk with a lot of personal sacrifice, a tough job. We saw the terrible loss of our Ambassador Stevens in Libya, and that's just one more example of the type of service that diplomats provide in the United States, and we have great respect for those in our foreign service and all those who represent our country abroad. So that's Mr. Friedman, who's here today. Thank you very much. We also have Nora, who is the ANCA Trade and Investment Policy Specialist. She graduated from the University of Pennsylvania, recently got her PhD from Columbia, where I understand you also attended Columbia, got a master's degree there, and has been very active through our Capital Gateway program and through a variety of other ways in reaching out to all the stakeholders on trade and investment issues, and is a great asset to us, and I think is able to, and she will in fact, present a picture of where we stand today in terms of the relationship, the U.S. Armenia trade and investment relationship, and then lay out some ideas and options for how we might go forward in the coming months and years. So with that, I'll hand it off to Nora.
So I'd like to again welcome you to our roundtable event today, and I think it's a great opportunity to
first of all lay out what is the state of our current economic relationship, and then present some ideas for how we can move forward to build upon this relationship in a mutually beneficial way. Shortly after independence, the Armenia and U.S. Signed a few critical treaties which currently dictate U.S. Armenia trade relations. One is the Investment Incentive Agreement, which specifically provides the framework for the legal framework, the operations of the Overseas Private Investment Corporation, which supports private investors and protects private investors by providing financing, guarantees, insurance for their investments overseas. Secondly, the U.S. Armenia signed the Agreement on Trade Relations, and this specifically deals with intellectual property and provides for fair competition within the market. And finally, the U.S. and Armenia have a bilateral investment treaty. And this treaty regulates the investment climate and also provides for arbitration when there are disputes. Specifically, this agreement promotes trade, investment, and growth, and encourages market-oriented policies so that private investment can be conducted in an open, transparent, and non-discriminatory way. In terms of other policies that the U.S. and Armenia participate in is the Generalized System of Preferences, and otherwise known as GSP. And GSP is a program which helps developing economies achieve economic growth through preferential duty-free status for many, many products. And Armenia takes advantage of this program. I think in 2010, 91% of Armenia's exports to the United States were covered under GSP. And this is equivalent to over $60 million. I think it's close to even $70 million. And in addition to being very helpful for Armenian exporters, this is a great program for the United States as well, because many of the exports, a wide variety of the imports that are coming into the United States are raw materials, machinery, and components that are used by U.S. businesses to create jobs and products in the United States. And then finally, the bedrock, I would say, of the U.S. Armenia trade relationship is the U.S. Armenia Joint Task Force. And this task force was established in 1999 and meets to discuss a variety of issues ranging from trade and investment, market reform, and ways to cooperate, specific ways to cooperate in a variety of different sectors. And over the years, the discussion has transitioned from an aid-based discussion to a trade-based discussion. And this reflects the maturation of the economic relationship between the two countries. And most recently, in the last task force meeting was in Yerevan in October 2012. And specifically, they discussed customs and tariffs, intellectual property, as well as taxation, I believe. And most importantly, they signed a memorandum of understanding concerning cooperation within the energy sector. And in terms of this task force, unfortunately, despite the fact that the frequency of meetings has decreased from twice a year to once a year, it provides a great foundation on which further economic relationships and ties can be built. Since 1992, the United States has granted permanent normalized trade relations with Armenia, and Armenia has also been admitted into the World Trade Organization. And the U.S. and Armenia have also had a very dynamic relationship in a variety of other areas, and they've signed agreements regarding security, regarding transportation, energy, just to name a few, although there have been limited steps, concrete steps, in terms of economic development. And so what we want to discuss here today is how do we take those steps and how do we move forward. So one option is looking at a trade investment framework agreement, otherwise known as a TIFA. And TIFAs provide for high-level government-to-government dialogue to discuss, again, a variety of issues. So that are related to trade, including intellectual property, market access, labor issues, the environment, and many, many others. And TIPAs have been negotiated by the United States with over 50 countries and other economic zones, many of these countries being developing democracies and emerging markets, and provides a framework for a long-term economic relationship which would allow for progress and further development. The United States and Armenia do not have an updated bilateral taxation agreement. The current taxation is regulated by the U.S. USSR agreement from 1974. And unfortunately, the lack of an unambiguous tax treaty may be considered a hindrance to U.S. investment in Armenia. It also does not sufficiently address issues such as royalties, dividends, and interest, and it also doesn't adequately address the exchange of information and arbitration, which is so important for an emerging economy like Armenia. And finally, as the situation in Armenia changes, as the trade relationship matures, an outdated treaty makes it difficult to adapt to the changing circumstances on the ground. I don't want to say that these treaties are the only way to go in order to improve economic relationships. There are a variety of other things that can be done in parallel and in conjunction, and these can be done at the individual level and at the business level as well. So, for instance, a social security agreement would be very helpful for those individuals who divide their careers between the U.S. and Armenia, and clarifies the obligations and entitlements, and also consolidates their benefits in one country. Another example is looking at visa regulation. So visas are very important for for information exchange, training, trading, and investment purposes, and possible ways to facilitate that would be, for instance, to waive or reduce certain visa fees, or this can even be done for certain groups of people that are involved in trade, such as researchers or specific delegations, etc. And finally, we can also look at things like trade missions through the Department of Commerce. And these trade missions are great for connecting businesses to other businesses in specific sectors and for specific markets, so that they can find great ways of either reducing their costs or increasing their revenues through finding a specific niche market, which Armenia does have. And these should be fully explored in the future. So I guess in conclusion, I'd like to say that there are many, many opportunities to improve relationships. Many opportunities that look at creating jobs both in the United States and in Armenia for improving this relationship over the next 10 years. And I'd like to echo the call that many American companies have recently stated, namely NASDAQ, FedEx, Microsoft, just to name a few, that concrete steps towards improved economic relationships should be a priority. And I think that this discussion is so important to making that reality. And finally, I'd like to say that this relationship is very important for nurturing a lot of the positive changes that we have seen in Armenia over the past 15 years. And granted, there are always challenges with doing business in emerging markets. But over the past 15 years, we've seen a couple changes which are noteworthy and should be recognized. One being this transition from aid to trade. Armenia is no longer reliant on aid and is instead exporting into the international market and diversifying their exports. Secondly, it's emerged as one of the freer markets of the region. And lastly, it has demonstrated core competencies in specific sectors, and these should be further nurtured, namely IT software, pharmaceuticals, as well as other service industries, such as, for instance, banking. And with that, I'd like to say that after reviewing the foundation of this relationship that has been built since Armenia's independence, I'm very confident that we can see a lot of positive change in the next 15 years. And I look forward to all your comments and discussion.
Thank you very much, Nora. Turn it over to Justin Friedman. Justin.
Well, Aram, thank you very much for having me and for welcoming me into the ANCA community. It's a pleasure to be here this evening.
We've made a key for you.
It's difficult to go after Nora because she touched on a lot of the things that I was going to touch on too, so I may sort of be a little herky-jerky as I go through my remarks and cut out stuff so we save time and can get to the real important part here, which is the discussion. I have been following Armenia off and on for over 20 years, 25 years of my professional life. Before I was a diplomat, I was a business consultant working in the telecommunications sector in Eastern Europe and the former Soviet space. And so I have this number in my head because one of the key development factors we looked at back then was how many telephones existed per household. This is before cell phones had any kind of widespread distribution. And I remember that Armenia had, among the former Soviet states, and the states that emerged from the Soviet Union, one of the highest telephone penetration rates. And that was a key indicator of GDP and also intellectual IT capability. So Armenia's been on the radar for IT, as Nora mentioned, for quite some time now. So it's something I'll come back to a little later in my remarks. I also, before I started this job, I was working on sort of what some people consider the bad guy side of trade. I was working on non-proliferation. And Armenia is in a rough neighborhood on the proliferation sphere, and it's one of its neighbors is actively seeking to procure nuclear weapons. So obviously we wanted to work with Armenia in that capacity to make sure that as Armenia became a better trade partner and a more aggressive and active trade partner, it was ensuring appropriate controls over technologies that may come into or be created in or pass through Armenia on their way to other locations. Let me jump into my formal remarks here, and let me start with an assumption. I'm going to assume, and I think it's a safe assumption, I'm going to assume that everybody in this room cares passionately about Armenia's development. But I'd also like to test that assumption. So I'm going to ask for a show of hands. I hear a little bit of groaning. Only 3 questions, okay? So we'll get through them quickly. Raise your hand if you agree with the following statement. First statement. I want Armenia to have a dynamic economy that is a global investment magnet. Show of hands. Who agrees with that? Okay. That was easy. Second question. Second statement. I believe that Armenia can improve on its World Bank ranking on ease of doing business. All right. Third statement. I am ready to explore business opportunities in Armenia. A few. That's great. That's fantastic. You know, I'm not here to market Armenia to you, but I do have a theory. And my theory is that while Armenia may not have the most abundant natural resources, its most important natural resource is its people. And further, my theory is that Armenia could become that global investment magnet that I mentioned in my little survey there, with a few strategic reforms. What I'd like to do is I'll get back to those reforms in the context of my remarks, but I want to spend the bulk of my time discussing how the U.S. is working as a friend and a partner of Armenia to make this global investment magnet opportunity happen. It's not in our hands. I think that's obvious. Key issues and key areas that have to be addressed are in the hands of the Armenian people and the Armenian government. But we, as a friend of Armenia, want to help in that process. And let's be clear, this isn't about charity. It's not about altruism. I want American businesses to profit. I want American citizens to get the most of the business opportunities that are available in Armenia. And the kinds of changes and reforms and initiatives, some of which have already happened and some of which are underway, are good not just for American businesses, but they're good for Armenian businesses. And ultimately, that's why I believe it's in Armenia's interest to explore and to look at these reforms that we're going to talk about. So let's talk a little bit about the goals that undergird some of the things we talked about already, like the U.S. Armenia Task Force. You know, our core goal as a country is to help Armenia succeed as a democratic, prosperous, and secure country at peace with its neighbors. And as Aram has already suggested, we want to evolve our relationship into a true partnership and away from an assistance-based relationship. And I think we're in agreement here that we've already moved quite a ways down that path. And ultimately, and more relevant to this discussion tonight, we want to deepen our economic ties. We want to increase bilateral trade and investment and strengthen Armenia's economic prospects because these are goals we believe both nations share. So, Nora sort of cheated and didn't talk about obstacles, but I haven't. I think there are three areas where there are some obstacles to trade and investment in Armenia. And the first is competition. Right now, the economic structures are such that significant industries and significant businesses are controlled by a narrow group of people. And what that means is that Armenian citizens don't get the best prices for consumer goods. It means that business opportunities appear to be limited or controlled by a few. That may not be the case, but it's the appearance that it harms Armenia's reputation as an attractive business environment. There's a need for increased transparency, and it's again something that Nora talked about, which is really the areas where there really is a need for better effort on transparency are in the administration of customs and the taxation system. And before I came here, I went online and looked at the, where did I hide my numbers? Here I have, this is where I have my numbers. I looked at the World Bank Ease of Doing Business, and Armenia's rating isn't that bad, actually. It's pretty good, and it's gotten better in the last year. But the three weak areas, if you look at this report, are getting electricity, paying taxes, and enforcing contracts. So if that doesn't sort of give you a quick snapshot of what the challenges are and what the areas that can be addressed quickly, I think that's a useful starting point. So I talked about the need for competition. I talked about transparency and taxation and interaction with government. And the third area gets to that other weakness here, which was enforcing contracts. And to get there, the key way to do that is through independence of the judiciary, so that investors can have confidence that when they invest, if they sign a contract, they have a mechanism that it can be enforced. And if there is a dispute with an investment partner or with a contract, they have an assurance that when they go into the legal system, the result will be fair. So those are the challenges. But there is good news, and my thunder has been totally stolen on this one. So I'll just quickly say, Armenia has a very strong IT sector. The numbers are 20% growth in revenue in the last year, 15% annual growth in job creation. And there are American companies like Microsoft that are very active in the Armenian IT sector. So, as I said at the beginning, Armenia's future lies in its people, and it lies in a knowledge-based economy. And an IT sector, a pharmaceutical sector, health in general, these are all areas where Armenia's competitive advantage can really be brought into play. So what is our strategy as a government in working with our partner in Armenia to try and address these challenges? There's a concept that I will give credit to the man who created the phrase, and that's Ambassador Hovhannisyan, and that is the idea of creating options. So all across our engagement with Armenia, be it from talking about business investment, talking about local governance, about national politics, our goal is to help create options so that the Armenian people as consumers, as voters, can make choices and have options. The second thing is kind of obvious from what I've been saying, is to help Armenia leverage its strengths. Education, creativity, the budding commercial and public entrepreneurship that I have seen myself in my visits to Armenia. And the third area, and this is the challenge, and this is where I'm going to come back and ask for your help. The third area is in encouraging bold reforms. Countries get on the investment radar not by slow, incremental, small steps toward reform, but by big, splashy reform steps. That's just marketing 101. And it's not Armenia specific. Look at Armenia's neighbor, one neighbor in particular. It's been very bold, very public reform efforts. There are some questions about the depth of them, but those efforts have paid dividends in changing the rankings on all these perception indexes. And if Armenia wants to attract those global investors, the perceptions have to be changed, as well as the underlying reality that we've been talking about. So how do we work at trying to achieve those strategic objectives? First, we're working to open borders. It's no secret that Armenia has a big disadvantage in that 2 of its 4 borders are closed. And as I mentioned earlier, one of those borders is with a country where a significant portion of the trade with it is under sanctions, international sanctions. So we are working, and it's part of our dialogue with Turkey, it's part of our dialogue with Azerbaijan, to try and help open up those borders, to find a solution to the lingering conflict over Karabakh, and to create that opportunity. These are tough diplomatic negotiations. I'm going to look at Master Evans, and he knows from personal experience, these things take time. And so while we need to have patience in the diplomatic process, we don't need to wait. And the fact of a closed border should not become an excuse for not pursuing other opportunities that are available. The second area where we're pursuing this broad agenda is, as has already been mentioned, our robust dialogue through the U.S. Armenia Task Force. I think we've already covered that, so I'm just going to skip over that, but I think you got the idea of what the goals are. And I was nervous that you weren't going to mention the Energy MOU, because that is, from my perspective, proof that we are really evolving that dialogue to something robust, trade and development oriented, and away from an excessive focus, in my mind, on assistance and assistance needing out. The third area where we're working on is using the assistance tools we have. And I don't need to tell this Washington audience that the assistance tools are limited, and there is significant political pressure and financial pressure in this country to limit the dollars that are devoted to that tool. But we want to make sure that as we use that assistance tool, we use it in a smart and strategic way to address some of the areas we talked about. I have 2.5, 3 pages of 2 pages of sort of specifics. I don't want to get into them because I think it'd be much more interesting to have a dialogue about the other things we can do other than what we're already doing. But the nutshell of these points is that the things we're doing with our assistance are in the classic biblical sense of we're not giving fish to the hungry. We're teaching the fishermen how to fish, how to create a business, how to do a business plan, how to apply for a bank loan, and many more things across the business development sector, so that Armenians and Armenian businesses can get started and can learn how to become competitive nationally, and if they are so orient themselves toward the global market. So let me wrap up with a challenge, which is how can you in this audience, how can the people who care about Armenia help? And the first thing is what I like to call mentorship. There are many young and not so young entrepreneurs in Armenia who are not sure how to proceed. And I'm vividly recalling when I was last in Vanadzor, and I had a meeting with a couple of social entrepreneurs. And as we were talking, there was this sense of, oh, it's not for us, it's for the next generation. Maybe the next generation will solve the problems. And I pounded my fist on the table and said, no, you are the next generation. And so we need to use our social networks, our personal networks, to encourage the creativity and the energy of the Armenian citizens, of the Armenian people, to go for it, to take some chances and to exercise those opportunities as social entrepreneurs or as business entrepreneurs. The second thing, then I'm looking at the people who held up their hands when they said, I'm exploring business opportunities, is you do need to be patient and persistent. The lesson from the post-Soviet business creation world is that the people who ran in the early 90s, and I was one of the ones getting consulting dollars to these people who are running in getting these business opportunities, is that most of them lost their shirts. And they lost their shirts because they thought, oh, this is a new market, I'm an experienced Western businessman, I will snap my fingers and make money. It doesn't work that way. It takes patience, it takes persistence, it takes market knowledge. And so those of you who are looking at business opportunities or considering them need to approach them patiently and do your due diligence, know who your partners are. And the third area where interested Americans can help is I'll put it bluntly, have the backs of reformers. What I mean by that is that to address things like customs reform and taxation and transparency of government are going to require some difficult reforms. And there are interest groups like the concentration of business wealth who have an interest in maintaining the status quo. So in order for the people who want to see change to make change possible, be they in government or in the citizenry, they're going to need moral support. And that's probably, in some ways, the most important thing we from the United States can do, is to provide that moral support and that encouragement for the people to make the kind of reforms that Armenia needs to become that global competitor. So everything we've talked about tonight is going to require hard work. That's from me and my colleagues in the U.S. government, and I'm going to take some homework here because I want to get homework from you of what else I can and should be doing to work with Armenia on trade and investment. You here in the audience, you'll need to share your skills and experience with your Armenian partners. And most importantly, the people and the government of Armenia will have to take some bold and sometimes difficult steps to address the challenges and create the opportunities for Armenia to compete in the global marketplace. Thank you, and I look forward to this discussion.
Thank you so very much. Thank you. We're joined by many folks today. You'll have a chance to offer your thoughts and introduce yourself before you do, but I just want to point out again that Guy Lawson is here, one of Justin's colleagues. Also, Michael Cavey is back there, and we appreciate both of them being here. We also have a diplomat from America who served in Armenia, and a diplomat from Armenia who's serving in America. We have Ambassador John Marshall Evans and his wife Donna Evans who are here. We have also Dr. Andranik Hovhannisyan, who was at the our number two man at the Armenian Embassy in here in Washington. So with that, I would say let's open up to any comments you have, questions you have. If you'd like some information, sort of just ask Nora or Justin. You can ask me if you like. And just all I would ask is just introduce yourself and let's try to get as many different voices talking as possible, because I think ANC is best when we, I'll speak for myself, ANC is best when we listen and learn, and that's what we like to do today. So we can turn first to Andranik.
Thank you, Aram, and I would like also to thank our distinguished speakers for very enlightening presentations, especially for someone like me who is not very much aware of all those peculiarities of our economic relations. Usually it is not part of my portfolio, so I appreciate that very much as an introduction. I would like to add to the discussion a few comments from our perspective. These are actually the issues Armenian side usually raised, I believe, during the recent years through the U.S. ATF and our formats, just to make sure, and not just to make sure we are not forgotten, because I believe everyone who is more or less engaged in this understands and knows our position, but to once again to reiterate. But first, we'll go to free trade agreement, and I believe as the US ATF's Armenian side has continuously raised the issue of negotiating or to looking at the possibility of negotiating free trade agreement with the United States. We believe that it will give a great boost to our economic relations. In this case, I would like to draw some parallels with our relations with the European Union. As most of you probably know, we are now negotiating association agreement with the European Union. There are several paragraphs in this association agreement, and one of the paragraphs is devoted to a free and deep, comprehensive free trade area. We have covered most of paragraphs in association agreement, but this one is still remaining. However, our European partners are negotiating with us the possibility of coming to an agreement on this. The process started in 2010, so 2 years ago. In February 2012, the European Commission made an assessment of the recommendations and what Armenia has done throughout the 2 years, and they came to a conclusion that Armenia did pretty well in implementing those recommendations which come from European Union and the European Commission. We recommended the member states of the European Union to start the actual negotiations on a free trade agreement. This, why I am bringing this example is to show that through incremental steps actually, and with assistance and with dedication, there is a possibility to come to some stages which can help us to go forward. So it's not, I think, just of course, the big initiatives are very important, big reforms, but also incremental steps can bring to some important stages. The second point which I would like to raise, of course, was covered by Nora, is the Trade and Investment Framework Agreement, TIFA. Again, Armenian side has raised these issues through different formats. We think that especially due to absence of FTA, TIFA can stand as an important important signal to both Armenian and US businessmen that there is very good development in bilateral economic relations, and will give them confidence, further confidence in expanding them. We of course understand the points of our US colleagues at the State Department that we are still remote from the free trade agreement, and perhaps TIFA is also there are another difficulties with TIFA. However, as Chinese proverb says, the 1,000-mile long journey starts with first steps. So we think that it's worthwhile to look at the possibility of doing these first steps. Next point, which I would like to raise, the generalized system of preferences. Again, Nora touched this issue. Of course, Armenia has its quotas, but in several of the categories which we have, Armenia has also already reached its ceilings. So there is a need for enhancing those ceilings. Not being an expert, I don't know which are those categories, but businessmen in Armenia are advocating for enhancing those ceilings and also adding some new items on the list. Just as Justin looked through, Mr. Friedman looked through different sources before coming here, I also did. I went to the Georgian GSP, considerable list, 2-page list, but most of those items enlisted in this GSP for Georgia, I believe, could also be exported from Armenia. They are not that strange to Armenian economy as well. Again, drawing parallels with Georgia, I understand it's probably awkward to draw parallels with any state because every state has its own parameters of looking at it and its own peculiarities. But Georgia is our neighbor, more or less. We are in the same situation. Georgians, USA, Georgia have agreed TIFA in 2007, if I'm not wrong, and are working in this framework. Also, the possibility of negotiating free trade agreement is on the agenda of the US-Georgia Strategic Partnership Commission. So these are some things that also, in our opinion, could be do or could be worthwhile to look in US-Armenia relations. The next point is on double taxation agreement, as Nora mentioned. The one existing now, which is operating now, was signed between the USSR and USA. Armenia, together with our former Soviet republics, inherited that agreement, and our businessmen, I have to confess, are benefiting from that agreement. However, as an independent state, we are looking forward to have a separate agreement with the USA on bilateral basis. Millennium Challenges Corporation, Armenia is committed to continue its relations with the Millennium Challenges Corporation. Prime Minister of Armenia in December met with the Executive Director of the MCC, Mr. Hovhannisyan, and reaffirmed our commitment. Last year, a few of our indicators, we had few positive indicators in different rankings, as Mr. Friedman mentioned their importance. Many of us know the Freedom House, the Transparency International, ease of doing business. Only in ease of doing business, Armenia made 24 points improvement. In Transparency International Fighting Corruption Index, we made an 25-point improvement just last year alone. So we think that this indication can be helpful for future our cooperation with MCC. And the last point, which is not directly, of course, related, it is directly related to economic issues, but it's not an economic issue in itself, is a visa liberalization issue. We are looking forward for visa facilitation with the United States, again drawing parallels with our relations with the European Union. This year, starting from February 1st, I think, if I'm not wrong, we have a visa facilitation agreement in force with European Union countries, which give for some sort of public to get easy visas, easy procedure to get visas, which we think will help businessmen from Armenia to make more long-term planning, also to be confident on their future business in the United States. So these are the main points which I would like to bring to your attention. Thank you very much.
I'd love to invite Nora, Justin, to offer any thoughts on what Andranik had to offer, and then I'd like to have Ambassador Evans, who spent many years on the ground in the other one. So please, if you have any comments on, if you'd like to, any comments or.
Just a general comment. There are some very good ideas here on this list, and some of them we are, as Andranik knows, we are actively exploring. I can't get into the details of some of these discussions, but these are things we're looking at. Some of them do require either Armenia to adjust to specific statutory requirements, like visa rules. There's a lot of discussion in the U.S. about how do you get a visa, and there are very specific legal and statutory requirements that govern that. But things like fees, which was mentioned earlier, fees are set by reciprocity. So, and our general policy is we're ready to negotiate reciprocity and lower the fees as low as they can go. So that's an opportunity we can explore, and I'll take that back. But what I'd really like to do is get some more ideas that we can contribute to this.
Ambassador Evans.
I first of all, I think these presentations were superb. And I was so glad, Nora, that you mentioned the US ATF, because I really think that even in the absence of a TIFA, it's a great chance for officials of both sides to make sure that they're not missing something. It's so easy with how busy everybody is to not focus on something. And so even once a year, I think that's a terribly important thing. Now, one question for Justin is whether the results, of course those discussions have to be private discussions between two governments, but I wonder if there could be a little bit more dissemination, perhaps just in the form of a briefing or something like that, so that people would have an appreciation of what's going on in these discussions. I think that might be useful on both sides. I mean, not betraying any confidences, but it's not that secret. I mean, it's not, it would just be good to get some of that out there. The other point I'd like to mention is the important potential of the American University in Armenia, because precisely in those areas that both of you have mentioned, the IT, health sciences, epidemiology, those kinds of things. That university can really be a way of partnering with private enterprise, training cadres to do various things, and so one way to help is by direct investment. Another way is by supporting the university. There are people who've gone over there and taught, and that still is going on. And it's just a very important, in the long run, I think we will see how important that is. The other thing I just wanted to mention was and is really the role of the U.S. Department of Agriculture over the years. Now it's been turned over to a legacy organization there, but there was some very good work done. I mean, the agriculture for any country is an important source of accumulating wealth and creating capital, and so I think that's an important. We shouldn't lose sight of the agricultural dimension. I mean, Armenia is still, despite the flight of a lot of young people to the capital, it still is an agricultural country in many respects. So that's another important element. And I would just, last thing I'd mention is that increasingly, it seems to me, Armenians are sensitive to environmental concerns. And now this is not so much our President Obama has emphasized that there are jobs to be had from thinking about the future of our environment. Armenia has a very stressed environment, partly because of the terrible years that followed the earthquake and the Karabakh war and so on. There was a lot of deforestation, but we do have the Armenia Tree Project, and there are some very important species that exist in the Caucasus that are on the danger list. So that there's a tremendous opportunity for cooperation also in that field, even though it may not be seen as primarily business.
Can I just make two quick points about
free pass to comment anytime?
Okay.
Also,
on this U.S. ATF, the U.S. Armenian Task Force, I take the ambassador's point very to heart that we can be more open and transparent about what we're doing there. It is a very robust and very comprehensive dialogue that covers just about everything that we've been talking about here. But it doesn't just meet once a year. We meet in plenary once a year, but we have working groups under that meet throughout the year. And that's where a lot of the hard work is done. And so the plenary is where we get to do the fun things like signing the energy MOU, which is on the web. So we did put that out there. We did do a press conference at the end of the last one in October, so there is some more information out there. But I take the point that we can do more, and so I'll take that one back.
You just reminded me, if I may, just a footnote to this. You mentioned energy, and I think the recent cooperation, in particular around Metsamor, I mean, this is a very difficult issue, but Metsamor provides some 40% of the electricity in Armenia, and the American assistance there, I think, has been vital.
questions, comments, suggestions, any thoughts? I got it.
Yeah, thank you. My name is Hai. I'm journalist with the Armenian Soldier. It's not a secret that lots of American businesses are moving to China at this point. And this has become a hot topic even on the presidential debate level, as we have seen throughout last years. And I know that lots of IT companies also moved to China at this point. I have been to Massachusetts a couple of years ago. There were 2 Armenians who were jobless because their companies, which were IT companies, moved to Beijing. Well, I understand that the best scenario would be that there is no business moving out from America for the United States economy. But maybe the golden mean would be that if these companies are moving, at least they are not moving to a rising competitor as China, which has the second GDP now, I think, in the world. So I was picturing some kind of hypothetical scenario that the United States and Armenia maybe will be thinking and considering a strategic a project that a plan that these companies, the IT companies, if they are moving, at least they move to Armenia, because the Armenian scholars and young guys, I'm pretty sure they will be capable to handle these tasks. That Armenia really can be converted to a second Silicon Valley for our region. So I know that Google and other Intel are moving right now, but I think this is a more random projects developed by, thanks to efforts of the Embassy of Armenia and the United States in Yerevan and Washington. But is it possible to develop this type of, strategic goal of, coordinating between Yerevan and Washington a process when, if an IT company is moving, at least it will move to us?
Well, if I were Armenian, I would love to have the MacBook Air, is that what you're using there? Their factory in Yerevan, so that I could hopefully get it cheaper than having to go to New York and 47th Street to get a good deal on. All joking aside, businesses make decisions to move based on their self-interest, and their bottom line is risk and return. So Armenia can become an attractive place for businesses to move if it addresses the risk element and the return element. The higher the risk, the higher the return has to be. The lower the risk, the lower the return has to be for businesses to invest. So that's part of the dialogue in the ATF, is let's deal with issues like customs transparency. If an American business perceives that today the shipment of their product into Armenia is going to be subject to one tax rate, and then tomorrow it might be subject to another one, that is a business risk, and that will slow down or halt entirely investment. So that's the kind of thing that we can address through the dialogue and try and change that risk, the actual risk, and then also deal with the perception of that risk. Return is a function of a number of things: cost of capital, cost of labor, productivity of labor, and these are factors where education and investments in education that we have made through our programs of assistance, but more importantly the Armenian government is making to make it an attractive place where its workers are very attractive. And IT, high tech, these require highly skilled workers. There is a good educational base in Armenia. These are things that can be explored, but the governments deal with the ease of doing business, and then the private sector decides where to put the investments.
George?
Question, George Cowart. I agree with you that the issue is risk and return, and I agree that the 500-pound elephant in the room is sort of fraud and transparency issue. What steps do you see, and maybe Ms. might have covered earlier, I apologize for my late entrance, but I know, for example, through the State Department, through USAID, through the Department of Commerce, we've done several programs with commercial law development where we've sent attorneys, for example, to Egypt to train the judges following the fall or the revolution. We've done things with Nigeria where we're similar, I wouldn't say necessarily the exact level of transparency, but we're seeing that IT and healthcare seem to be the way to circumvent the corruption, if you will, because there's not as much control, it's not as tangible. What programs can we get engaged in, or what programs are currently in process that we can support that do these types of activities, whether it's a commercial law development, economic development, independent judiciary, tech, etc.?
Well, actually, we do have all those things that you mentioned. The CDLP, the Commercial Law Development Program, is active in Armenia. I'm going to look at Guy for Sabit is there as well.
Another exchange, and also some of the USAID programs are specifically targeted at improving IT, helping IT businesses, pharmaceuticals, tourism, food processing, which makes it sort of successes in the USDA programs are in developing those businesses on one hand, and then also on the other, working with government to help improve the enabling environment, but through the commercial law development program, for example, working on IPR enforcement, customs valuation, commercialization, technology, all of those things.
Yeah. So, short answer is we're doing all of those things, but I welcome feedback if you think that we're not getting a certain area this is something we'll throw into the mix. We have very robust dialogue internally in the U.S. government to make sure that we're targeting the right challenges where we have the most to offer. And we also coordinate very closely with the European Union on the wide range of cooperation and assistance that we provide to make sure that we're not, that we're making sure that Armenia is adjusting its laws in ways that are consistent with the European Union under the DCFTA, but also so that we're not duplicating effort, because money is scarce on that side of the pond as well, and so we don't want to duplicate.
Okay, Armenian American, a research associate from the European Institute. Thank you very much for the presentation. This was very insightful. My question is kind of tri-dimensional, let's put it that way. It mostly has to deal with railroads. Recently, Georgian Prime Minister, newly elected Prime Minister Hovhannisyan made a statement in Yerevan when meeting with the Armenian Prime Minister regarding possibly opening the railroad between Armenia that passes through Georgia into Russia. You talked about, and Ambassador Hamparian has talked about giving Armenia options, and this is, I think, a very good and very realistic option to give to Armenia to boost its economy. What do you see the role of the United States in, or if any, in trying to help in negotiations and try to open this railroad between Armenia passing through Georgia into Russia? The second question with railroads is between Armenia and Iran, because I'm sure you know that there are talks about opening a railroad. Is that a potential threat, or how does the United States government view that type of a project between Armenia and Iran? And finally, the Eurasian Economic Community that Putin has been spearheading for the last several years and trying to push Armenia into this economic bloc, although it doesn't have a border with Armenia. How does the U.S. government view the Eurasian Economic Community and Armenia's possible membership of it? I know it's a lot, but thank you. It's
a lot, and they're tough questions too. Let me try and take them in order. On what we're talking about with railway is there's long-standing railroad track right-of-way that was built in the Soviet era and probably even before in the Imperial Russian era. A railroad that runs on the Black Sea coast from Russia into Georgia and then up to Armenia. A lot of that rail link was either blown up or damaged during the conflicts in the Caucasus area of Georgia. And so any restoration of that link would require some significant infrastructure work. But probably more importantly, it would require close cooperation between Georgia and Russia and the inhabitants of the Caucasus region of Georgia. The good news is that Georgia and Russia have agreed under Russia's WTO accession that they will allow trade corridors in a status-neutral fashion. So that offers the prospect that at some point down the road, that corridor could be restored not just for truck-based traffic, but also rail. But that's a long process, and it's one of these areas where I think we have to be patient. But the opportunity is there. It will take time to develop, and I think that, I don't want to misquote any other country's leader, but I think that that was a clear understanding on the part of the leaders who mentioned this, that there would be a process to get there, and it's not something that can happen overnight. Iran, obviously, is much more problematic. We recognize that Armenia is in a tough neighborhood, and its options are limited, and we want to expand those options. But any cooperation with Iran must be viewed through the lens of Iran's activities. And as I mentioned at the start, I worked on the non-proliferation and preventing Iran from getting dangerous technologies and materials. And so any activity with Iran would have to be evaluated through that lens, through international sanctions, and through U.S. sanctions law. So bottom line, I would be very cautious and skeptical about near-term opportunities there. The third one is the Eurasian community. I started with the notion that we wanted to create opportunity for Armenia and create options. A core bedrock piece of our 20-year engagement with Armenia and our relationship is that Armenia should be able to choose its friends, its allies, and its business partners. And so if Armenia makes a choice that it wants to have a trade relationship or other customs relationship with another country, that's its business. But I would only caution that those relationships should be among equals. And I have read Armenian commentary, and I think my sense of the Armenian expert community is that they see the DCFTA with the EU as the real opportunity, and that the opportunity for the Eurasian community is let's call it hard to quantify and hard to identify what the benefits to Armenia would be. So of your three, number one, maybe over time, the other two,
Fair enough. I know we have Don here who I know offers some very thoughtful insights. Arsen, I'd love to hear your thoughts and questions. Alexi, of course, from the Voice of America. Anyway, any of you here, thoughts, comments, suggestions, things to be done better?
Yeah, I mean, it's been spoken for so long now, a possibility for free trade agreement, and Andranik from the embassy also mentioned. We know the task force has been talking about this. We know that during the official visits there are bilateral talks, and of course around the context. We remember President Saakashvili of Georgia visiting the United States and meeting President Obama, where President Obama mentioned the possibility for free trade agreement. What are the options for Armenia?
Well, you know, what we said with President Saakashvili is that we would explore deepening the trade relationship, including the possibility of an FTA. There are many stopping points, or not stopping points, but there are many way stations along the way to an FTA. And similarly, Armenia has the opportunity to explore these same opportunities, and that's what one of the core pieces of the dialogue that we have in the U.S. ATF is all about. So the challenge is, okay, there is a vision of a future of an expanded trade relationship, and then the question is, how do we solve the real near-term issues to make those opportunities real? You know, and whatever label we put on that dialogue, it really is less important than the goals, and the goals are to expand the trade opportunities.
Fair enough.
I'm curious about job creation incentives, maybe for Andranik also. What kind of indicators do you have in your programs, and are there local content requirements, if you can get into any specifics like that, in terms of investment in Armenia?
I'm not sure I understand your question. You mean in U.S. assistance programs?
Yeah.
And whether they have local
and
content
also
requirements?
just investment assistance programs.
Mm-hmm. Well, the overarching goal of the programs, be they assistance or investment development, is to create opportunities in Armenia that naturally would create jobs. So it's job creation is intrinsic to all these programs. But in terms of specific programs having legal requirements, they're actually kind of the other way. You know, U.S. contractors have to be the ones who provide a lot of the assistance, or be the master contractors. So the goal is, yes, absolutely job creation, but there's no. But that is the overarching meta goal, if you will. It's not a sub goal within each of these programs.
Fair enough. Please.
Going back to the free trade thing, I think it's important for Armenia to ask about free trade with the U.S., but I think it's even more important to ask what is Armenia doing itself to meet the criteria to ask for free trade. I mean, you mentioned transparency, but there also has to be accountability with that action. Maybe what's your comment on it?
I think that free trade is a function of an expanding economy and good business practices, transparency of systems that govern businesses, and predictability of those systems is inherent to that. So that is where we're going, and that's the goal.
Well, I don't want to sound too much argumentative. Of course, government does everything to expand the opportunities and transparency. Let me bring just a few numbers again from international rankings and indexes. The Heritage Foundation, together with the Wall Street Journal, does the ranking of the freedom of economy in different countries. Armenia is in the mostly free economy cluster, but just on the edge of becoming in the cluster to enter the cluster of those countries which are free economies. So we are on the 38th place in the ranking of 170 something countries, the free economic countries start from 35. So we have just 3 points to improve to get there. And of course, this, as I mentioned, this index was prepared by the Wall Street Journal and very authoritative institutions, Heritage Foundation. Again, I would mention the World Bank index. And before coming here, while I was looking through these internet sources, I found out that today International Monetary Fund announced about the disbursement to Armenia for another $51 million loan, I believe. And this was done after the reviewing of Armenia's implementation of commitments for the IMF and the meeting IMF criteria. And the review said that for the 3 last years, Armenia is making a steady economic growth. For 2011, the growth was 4.3%. For 2012, believed to be 6%. And Armenia is doing pretty good, according to IMF, in implementing the reforms. So there are a lot of such indicators pointing out that Armenia, notwithstanding of its difficult neighborhood and difficult economic situation, is doing some concrete steps towards meeting all those criteria which are necessary for having free, transparent market. This may be an answer to your question.
Andranik, if you have a question, or Mary, or Usha, any thoughts, comments, things that you've always wished to ask, but maybe never had the opportunity to?
Actually, my question is Musha Aramian, and my question is more regard the energy issue. You mentioned that the electricity price is kind of high in Armenia, and that's, I guess, one of the main issues also, that it holds the economic growth, especially in production. So, what are the solutions? Where are we going in that term, and what's the next step on that issue? I don't know if you want to answer that, Ambassador.
Just very briefly, the MOU that we signed at the U.S. ATF in October was about the energy sector broadly. And it was about looking at alternative generation capacities, environmental protection, getting a comprehensive view of the energy grid, the generation sources, and the tariff structures that undergird it, to make sure that it is long-term sustainable as a financial investment and produces the energy that Armenia needs today and into the future. So it's a comprehensive thing. It's not something that happens overnight, but this agreement that we signed sets out a framework through which we're going to work together to explore the challenges, to do some necessary background research, look at interconnection with regional neighbors, to go through all these issues to make the grid as reliable as possible, as interconnected as possible, and as environmentally sustainable as possible.
Andranik, Nora, if you'd like to comment on?
It's a very specific question. I don't know really what are the specificities of the issue. Just to add what Justin said, that the Armenian government is looking also to renewable energy possibilities, and the hydro generation, because Armenia has a lot of mountainous rivers, so we are looking to that opportunities as well. And if I'm not wrong, we are doing that again with the assistance of European Union partners, our international partners. The Ambassador Evans also mentioned that that the ecological situation, environmental situation in Armenia is very important one, and the people have a lot of awareness of what's going on in Armenia. People are very attentive of environmental situation in Armenia. And just to add that, probably not all of you know that the Nagorno-Karabakh movement in Armenia started 25 years ago just from the ecological movement, environmental movement. And today as well, people continue to be very enthusiastic on these issues, looking to all the opportunities to make the environment of Armenia more secure. Yeah, that's it.
Okay.
Hi. I just had a quick question, sort of drawing upon your background on non-proliferation, the aspect of the knowledge-based economy that Ambassador Evans had touched upon. Aside from the economic factors, for example, that are considered within the World Bank rankings and these other measures of either opportunity or perception. Where do you see the challenges and opportunities for greater U.S. Armenia cooperation as it relates to the intellectual capacity of its universities, its research and development base, given its historical background in the context of the Soviet Union, post-Soviet Union, but also the context of the neighborhood in which it operates. I would imagine that from a very American perspective, national security concerns would drive us to be a little bit more engaged than we are right now with the Republic of Armenia in those sectors, in addition to the overall economic benefits of engaging that sector and the business opportunities that go out of it, just from a purely national security perspective. You mentioned non-proliferation, cooperative threat reduction programs, things of that nature. I'm just not sure that those opportunities with the Republic of Armenia are at the same levels as its neighbors, and how do those then impact the economics, and quite frankly, what are the non-economic factors that are sort of preventing us from getting there?
Let's call that the cloud question, because there are lots of elements to it. Let me try and pick a few droplets from that cloud. I think that Armenia historically has had a very robust research base. Math and science in particular. Armenian chess players are world famous. That is the competitive advantage that Armenia has. Now in the Soviet era, you're right, there were programs that were designed to build weapons. And those programs have largely gone away, or completely gone away, some through our assistance, some through because they just were no longer needed. But the brain power that created a mathematical program that could guide a missile to a target can also create a software package that can turn your iPod into, I don't know, espresso machine. I'm joking because I can't think of a good opportunity. That's why I'm in diplomacy, not in business. But it's those opportunities. It's that science, that research. And people who are smarter than me in this stuff, like Microsoft, have programming shops in Armenia doing this kind of work. And there are eye doctors, and people are traveling to Armenia to get laser surgery on their eyes. So this is the kind of high quality, low cost services that Armenia can develop and nurture these industries in, and these are, Ambassador Heffern likes to call these centers of excellence. And there are a few of them out there, and they need to be nurtured and marketed so that customers know to come. If you want to get get the latest update to your Google search engine, a piece of the programming work can be done in Armenia at high quality and low cost. Or if you really need to get that eye surgery or your teeth worked on, maybe you should go to Armenia to get that done because it's high quality, low cost. Those are the kinds of opportunities. Set aside the proliferation issue, it's the technical skill and the ability to create that skill in a useful industry that is the opportunity for Armenia.
Fair enough.
So, Ambassador Heffern recently finished a wonderful tour across the communities and had some excellent discussion with community members. When community members would call into our office and say, hey, I went to this and participated and gave an update and all of this, one of the things that they would say is when they ask questions with regards to aid and trade and increasing trade, their response tended to be, well, Armenia has a lot of work to do. Now, obviously, Armenia has work to do, just like every other country in the world, in order to strengthen its economic base. But what would you say that this is a parallel effort? Like Armenia can be doing its work, but certainly the U.S. government can also be doing its work in terms of bilateral efforts with Armenia to aid in that effort in strengthening the economic structure within Armenia, but at the same time putting into place these types of agreements and treaties that Nora mentioned in terms of whether it's down the line an FTA or a TIFA or a double tax treaty, this type of thing. Do you see it as parallel, to what's going on in Armenia, or do you see it as one after the other, or where do you?
I would use the word partnership. I think we have this assistance budget, 33% of it is focused on economic development and growth. And those efforts are all designed to deal with the issues we've been talking about, to help Armenia come up with Armenian solutions to address the transparency issues, to address the predictability issues, so that it creates a good business environment, first and foremost for Armenians, and second for American investors, and then, okay, those other countries that want to ride on after us, yeah, well, we're going to get the deals first. But it's a parallel, it's a partnership effort, and so they all have to happen together.
What kind of feedback do you have, if any, from American businessmen who are already in Armenia?
The number one thing they say is they love working in Armenia. It's a beautiful country and wonderful people to work with. And then they talk about the challenges, which are what we've talked about today, or this evening. Transparency, transparent customs procedures, clear tax policies. Those are the kinds of things that American businesses tell us they need for them to go from where they are now to the next step.
You're looking like you have a question. I'm not going to call. Okay. Okay. Mary, you're smiling like you have a question. But, would I ask a question?
Well, I know that Armenia is developing a new project with UNDP, and I know that Armenia participates in that. I don't know if you have any comments on that, or a way that U.S. may participate, maybe through UN?
I'm not familiar with this project. What's the area?
I know it's economy and trade, but I don't think you know.
I'm sorry, I just don't know the details.
We'll get Senator Roberts will share it with Justin. Sure. Let's do the first question first, Kate.
Yes. We didn't touch that much upon it. I wanted to talk more about the blockades and how the administration made ending Turkey's blockade a primary objective, where they with the protocols, and at the time there was a lot of discussion about without preconditions and a reasonable time frame. This was almost 4 years ago, and we haven't seen progress. We've actually seen a regression. The Turkish Prime Minister ordering the demolition of a statue for friendship towards Turkey and Armenia. It's not progress. How has the U.S.-Turkey relationship suffered in any way when this was a prime objective of the administration, with President Obama and Secretary Clinton personally involved, invested a lot of their political capital, but we haven't seen any kind of repercussion between the U.S.-Turkey relationship. We understand that there's conversations at the highest levels, but there isn't any consequence. So how do you bring about progress when there isn't any consequence for a policy that Turkey is perfectly happy with?
We have a deep and complex relationship with our friend and ally Turkey, just as we have a deep and complex relationship with our friend and ally Armenia. And there's no tit for tat or trade-off that you're nice to one and you're not good in another. And these relationships exist. They are designed to move forward our agendas across a wide range of issues. And we do continue to talk to Turkey about opportunities. The interesting statistic that always strikes me is that Armenia's largest trade partner is Turkey. So there's something happening, that trade is flowing. It's not across the direct border, but there are business relationships. There are Turkish-Armenian business councils. There are movements. These are we're seeing the birth of constituencies in Turkey and in Armenia who want to push their governments for faster movement, to deal with the political issues, to open up the border, to enhance trade. As I said, some of these issues are difficult and going to be longer in gestation than we would want, but we have to let them take their own course, and we have to push them along the way as we go. And so I'm cautiously optimistic. I think there is a constituency in Turkey that wants to open the border. I think there is definitely a constituency in Armenia that wants to open the border. And as we work together and help bring these people together using some of the assistance resources we have, people-to-people programs that we do, we're creating a deeper and more robust constituency that will eventually lead to that. We all had an optimistic timeline that it would happen. It didn't happen on that timeline, but I still think it's going to happen.
As we're getting a little bit outside of the specifically future of trade relations, I'll use this opportunity to ask you a question about the Syrian Armenians. While Ambassador Haffner was here and was speaking at the Library of Congress, the same question was to him, and he had an answer on. The question is specifically about the possible support to the refugees of Armenian origin from Syria who moved to Armenia. We're talking now over almost 8,000 people, and we've been seeing pretty large support for the other countries that have been suffering because of the refugees from Syria, such as Turkey, Iraq, Jordan, or Lebanon. So Ambassador Haffner's answer was there has been no movement in that direction because there has been no request from the Armenian government. I don't know if this has been the issue with the Turkish government or the Jordanian government. Is this just a formal issue, or has there been any discussions about this at the State Department? What is actually being done just to support the refugees as they are in Armenia today?
Well, I will end up repeating a lot of what Ambassador Haffner said, because to date the Armenian government has not asked for any assistance. We have provided over, I have to look at my notes here, $365 million in assistance to refugees. That's wherever they are, to help with winterization supplies, food, healthcare, housing assistance. This is to UN agencies that support them. So we are working very actively and vigorously with the agencies that are supporting the refugees who have made it out of Syria.
Okay, thanks. Mr. Friedman, you are the director of the Caucasus region at the State Department. You not only obviously work with Armenia, but also Georgia and Azerbaijan. Now, my question is particularly to the southern region of Georgia, Samska Javakhet, or as Armenians call it, Javak, and as you know, there's a huge historical Armenian population there. And also, Armenia, as a landlocked country, has certain rights under the international law to have access to seaports in neighboring states and neighboring states. There are certain treaties that allow Armenia to do that. So, in that regard, what do you see the role of the U.S. in Georgia, particularly maybe through your office, trying to help Armenia to maybe activate the Georgian Armenian community in Samska Javakhet, as well as maybe pushing Georgian government to provide more favorable conditions for Armenia as a landlocked country with certain international rights?
My first trip when I took on this job, I went to all three countries that are under my responsibility. And I made a point of going to Samska Javakhet to see with my own eyes the conditions on the ground there. And so I saw the USAID projects that are creating agricultural mechanization stations that allow farmers, be they Georgian or Armenian, to get access to high productivity tools to increase their yields. I saw the MCC road that goes from Tbilisi to Samska Javakhet to make it easier for people who live in that region, be they Armenian or Georgian, to get their products to market. I drove on the road from there into Gyumri and then on to Yerevan. So I've seen what the Georgians themselves have invested to make that part of Georgia connected to Georgia and connected to the to Armenia and the rest of the world. There's a road that's almost completed now, and the Georgia and Turkey are talking about opening up a border crossing in that part of Georgia to facilitate trade. I know that a lot of the trade comes from the ports in Georgia through that region. So in short, I don't think we need to do anything because the Georgians are doing it because it's in their interest. It's business. It's good for them. It's good for the people in the community. The railway that's being expanded and rebuilt. We'll have the bogie changing station in Samska Javakhet, which will employ, by default, because the population is 95% are ethnic Armenian, ethnic Armenians to change the trains from one gauge to the other. Lots of good things are happening there, and it's happening through assistance programs, but it's also happening because that's what the Georgians want.
David.
Hi. I have a question with regards to this transparency that you're mentioning, and it could be that I'm not absolutely clear about it, but is transparency something that starts from the bottom or from the top? which means like the government.
The answer to that is yes. It comes from both directions and the middle. Transparency can be an internet-based way to file your customs form, so that you, the shipper, are declaring electronically what you're shipping in, and then the customs inspector acts on that electronic form, and then you get an answer like that. So you don't have to wait. Your business doesn't suffer because you incur demurrage delays while your shipped goods are in customs clearance. And it allows you to check and see, well, this is what I'm being charged, and this is what the charge rate is for this type of good. So it's on the bottom, but it's also from the top, because the central government has to create those platforms, those e-resources, and that is something that the Armenian government is doing on its own, and with our support, and with the European Union support. It's transparency that makes all these processes that are necessary for business clear, and it removes the opportunity for machinations.
Fair enough. Thoughts, comments, suggestions? Any ideas? You have something to say. I know you do. You'll want to.
I'll ask one of many questions. Oh. I'll just keep it to one. I'm curious if you can comment on the possibility of moving development assistance to direct government support, so essentially direct budget support for the Armenian government. I understand, given the financial crisis that we're all dealing with, the U.S. has to sort of reprioritize its resources around the world, but it seems like Armenia is in this, I guess, lucky group of countries that can graduate from development assistance to having direct budget support, and some countries that are in that lucky group include India, which is I don't know if it says more about Armenia or it says more about India, but I wonder if you could comment a little bit about that, about the logic of moving towards that and how that will support efforts for trade and investment.
I'm going to say I have to take that question and get back to you, because I just don't know enough about how much we do in terms of direct budget support. If I'm looking at guys, well, none in Armenia, but I just don't know what. Yeah.
We did just make with Georgia.
But
we did it coming
once
to an end.
Following the 2008
right.
conflict, and it was one time, so they could pay salaries.
And it is.
That was one deposit, and that was it. It was unique circumstance.
Fair enough. Further thoughts? I'm trying to get any. I think we're kind of starting to wrap up a bit. Maybe we can ask for any closing thoughts on either Justin or Nora, but last chance, or forever hold your peace. Ani, Sarah, any thoughts? No. Well, I think let's wrap it up. Maybe you can, if only say goodbye or offer any final thoughts. You'd love to, anything that you'd like to share, and then we'll turn to Nora, and then I'll say goodbye.
Well, let me first say thank you all very much for coming out this evening. I've learned a lot from you. I don't have all the answers as you learned, unfortunately, but where I don't have an answer, give me your business card, your email, and we'll try and get you an answer for a question that you felt wasn't answered fully or completely. I think the big point in all this is that this is a team effort, and the real ability to make Armenia an attractive investment place, it lies with Armenia and the efforts of the Armenian government. And our role is to be team players and to help them along the way, to help them learn the lessons faster, and help them become that kind of attractive global investment magnet that we all want it to be.
And I'd like to say that, although we may disagree at times about how to approach this issue, because it is a complicated issue and there's so many players, I think that it is important to understand that by having these discussions, having the dialogue, and disseminating the information and making those connections, whether it's government or business or on the personal level, that's what can really make those little incremental steps forward, which can lead to those big changes. And I think we'll see some really great changes in the next 10 years, and I'm looking forward to having many more of these kinds of events.
Thanks very much. Let me just, in closing, say that as an American of Armenian heritage, as many of us are, we've had a long relationship with our government and a long relationship of more than a century with our Department of State. And it's one of the most important dialogues that we have with the people that we help elect. It means a great deal to us. There are profound areas of disagreement, and Justin and his colleagues know our views on the genocide and on Nagorno-Karabakh and on other issues. And I think on this issue, there's I think more common ground and more opportunity for cooperation and partnership. I'll close with final thought, which is an agreement and a disagreement with a comment that you made earlier, which was, if I recall, along the lines of we need some splashy, bold reform. I would agree that we do need splashy and bold reform. I would simply argue that we need it both from Yerevan and from Washington. And with that, thank you all very much.